What if you planned on climbing Mount Everest, and when you got to the mountain, tragedy struck, which meant you weren't able to complete the climb? Well, that happened twice to a chap that I'm going to have a conversation with today. I'm on my way to see my friend Ellis. I'm catching the train from York up to Seaton Carew, and when I get there we're going to have a walk on the beach, have some fish and chips, and talk about the challenges that he faced on Mount Everest, how they changed his life, especially now that he's turned 50. Well, this is a first for me, 64 years of age. I've never been to Seaton Carew in my life. I'm just waiting at the station car park for Ellis to pick me up. All right, mate, how are you doing?
Great start.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
So we're on the beach here at Seaton Carew. We've just been hearing some of the tales of Seaton Carew, if you don't know about it. Apparently some guy faked his suicide and ended up living in Panama. And he lived up in a house up here somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Might even have been this one, was it?
It was.
Was it this one?
We're actually stood right outside it
Yeah.
there, Nick. He lived in a bedsit between the two houses. For about 3 years, he climbed through a secret doorway at the back of a wardrobe into the neighbouring bedsit. Came out at night, a bit like a vampire. He wandered the streets at night with a hood up.
Yeah.
And he got away with it. Nobody suspected a thing.
Yeah.
There was rumours he'd been seen, but then people were checking themselves because they knew he'd perished out in the sea in his canoe.
Yeah, and then eventually
Apparently.
he ended up in Panama.
Yep, and it was the photo that ended up on the internet from the estate agents that gave him away.
What was this guy's name?
John Darwin.
John Darwin.
John and Anne Darwin.
John and Anne Darwin.
Probably the most audacious fraud story in British history, if you ask me.
Yes. So that's it. That's Seaton Carew's claim to fame.
That's the history of Seaton Carew, the world famous insurance fraud scam.
Excellent. So now you know it. That's the history of Seaton Carew. However, Ellis has got some far more interesting stuff to talk about, and I'm particularly interested in what went on Mount Everest, and I'd also like to know how that influenced how he runs his life over the last kind of 10-15 years or so. So let's get into it. Let's ask Ellis some questions about this topic, because this one I think is going to be an interesting one. Right, Ellis,
Yeah.
Mount Everest, tell us a little bit more about it. As I understand it, you've been on Mount Everest twice.
Yes.
Did you get to the top?
No.
Tell us more about it.
It wasn't through sort of nothing to do with myself, it was events outside of my own control. Now, I'm not, first and foremost, Nick, I will say that I wasn't your stereotypical mountaineer. I was just a guy from the northeast who had a big passion and a big interest in mountains, and particularly Everest growing up as a small boy. When you say to somebody you've been to Everest, the number one question you get is, how long does it take to climb Everest? And the answer I've always gave for that is 20 years. It was a 20-year project for me. So the seeds of going to Everest was planted in my mind from a relatively young age. The actual expedition itself is an 8-week-long expedition. So it took me 20 years to mentally and physically prepare for this thing. And I knew it was a once and only deal for me. This was a trip of a lifetime. This wasn't a lifestyle for me. It wasn't something that I took myself away for 6-8 months of the year climbing all over the world. I was very, very single focused to go out to this mountain and have a go at reaching the top of the world. It was just a big dream, a big personal ambition, for no other reason than satisfying my own curiosity and ego. I didn't want to do it for any other reason. It wasn't to have a mantelpiece photo. It was just to prove to myself that I could do something like this. You see something from a relatively young age and you think, ooh, I want a piece of that. Can I do that? Is that the type of thing that I'm capable of achieving? And for me, that's all it was. As I said, it took me 20 years, possibly longer, to actually finally get to go to Nepal and have an attempt at climbing this mountain. And my first attempt was in 2014, which it's fair to say it didn't go particularly well. So 2014, that was your first attempt? My first, and what I thought at the time would be my only attempt. 2014 was a very interesting year in many respects, because if the truth be known, I'd gone all that way to Nepal and I didn't even step foot on the mountain. And it cost a lot of money in the process, money that I didn't have. So I'd had to get quite industrious with how I was able to get together I think it was $47,000 that it cost me at the time.
$47,000,
to go on to Everest in 2014, yeah. And then to get there, and to actually not step foot on the mountain was a huge blow. However, the reasons why I didn't get on the mountain, I was lucky to come home because a huge avalanche happened early on in the season, and there was some Nepalese mountain Sherpas were load carrying through the mountain, and they were unfortunately in the wrong place at the wrong time. Me and my team were about 4 hours behind these guys when this whole block of ice released off the western shoulder of Everest, killing these guys instantly. And that's sadly, that tragic event became the biggest disaster in the history of climbs on Everest at that particular moment in time, and the mountain was shut down. Nobody stepped foot on the mountain that year for obvious reasons. And when the moment came to go home, I was mighty relieved to actually go home and see my family again, knowing that the mountain had kind of not played ball that year. It just goes to show you the danger of these mountains. I went to Everest convinced that it was going to be a safe season, that I'd done everything in my power to get there and give it my best shot. And that was cruelly and tragically taken out of my hands that year.
So Ellis, I gather there was an attempt number 2, which was the year after, 2015, if that's right.
Yeah, that's
Tell
right,
us
Nick.
a little bit more. Did you manage to actually get on the mountain that time?
I did this time, but only just. It was still quite early in the season, and I hoped and prayed and assumed that this would be what I would class as a normal year. Now, a normal year on Everest could be anywhere from 400 to 500 people reaching the top. And unfortunately, you do still get the odd 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 fatalities. It's just the nature of the beast. It's a very unforgiving mountain, and you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it can go wrong. I didn't think that was going to happen because of the previous year. I thought lightning doesn't strike twice, but unfortunately it did. This time out in Nepal, an earthquake hit the entire country, and the effects of that did make its way across to Everest. So we had various aftershocks, and the actual initial quake itself occurred when I was actually on the mountain itself, this time in an area of the mountain called the Icefall, which is where in 2014 those 16 Sherpas unfortunately were when this block of ice came down. And I was very aware of where I was when the ground started moving beneath my feet. Now, I didn't know it was an earthquake. I just assumed that the block of ice that I was clinging precariously to was collapsing under my boots. It was only later in the day when we started to hear about what had actually happened that we became very, very conscious and very aware of the event that we were now caught up in. Yes, I survived. I was able to get up to Camp 1, which was that day's intended target, but we were hit with a powder avalanche. Base camp beneath our boots, where I'd left 6 hours earlier that morning, was completely obliterated. Had I been in my tent, I wouldn't be here now telling you this story. 19 people down beneath us at base camp were killed on the day the earthquake hit Nepal, when an avalanche came through and wiped out everything that was in its path. The destruction was just complete. It looked like one of those towns that you see in the Midwest after a tornado. Nothing was left. Unfortunately and fortunately, being on the mountain that year saved my life. Probably the safest place to be, even though I was avalanched. So we kind of went from bad to worse. 2014 was the biggest disaster to hit the mountain. 2015 eclipsed that, so you had 19 people who were now killed in one incident down at base camp, and again it shut all climbing, and that was the end of that. So Ellis has told us all about his experiences on Mount Everest twice, 2014, 2015. Now, if my maths are good on this one, I know you told me earlier that he's 52, so that means he must have been 41, 42, something like that? Yep, 41 when I came home from Everest the second time. Now, what I'm interested in is what life was like after Everest, because I know Ellis has said it was a lifelong ambition. It had consumed his life for a very long time. He went twice, obviously a lot of trauma, tragedy. Maybe he might have been suffering from a bit of PTSD afterwards. I know that when I was 44 and I sold my business, I found it very hard to adapt to life, something that was all consuming for me. It's slightly different than climbing Mount Everest, but maybe there are some parallels. Yeah. What was life like in your 40s? It wasn't the easiest, I'll be honest. People can say that your 40s can be a good decade, but for me, it was coming off the back of those two disasters on Everest. Not going to lie, Nick, I felt lost for a lot of years. I struggled to find myself. I had this passion and this big goal that had driven me for a large part of my life. And then coming home after 2015 and knowing that was it, there was no way I was going to return for attempt number 3. So I had to adjust to a life without the mountain. And I'll be honest, I struggled. It took me a good few years to discover myself and to get back on my feet. I just felt lost. I just felt worthless. I had no purpose in life anymore. And I really struggled because I'd just been so goal orientated and so ambitious about going to try and achieve this. And when it was suddenly taken away from me, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And it hit me hard. And I ended up actually in counselling. I ended up having therapy to work out what was going on, because I had no idea where all these feelings were coming from. And it took these counselling sessions to explain to me what happened to me in my life, which all came down to struggling to adjust to a life without the mountain as a driving force.
So when would you say that you were actually clear in your own mind that you had put it behind you and a new chapter of life had opened up? I mean, before you answer that, I'll say that my personal situation was, I found I was about 50 years of age before I can say that I really started to do something about it and for life to change. I know in my case it took me well into my 50s before I could actually say, listen, I'm content, I'm happy, I'm happy in my own skin. What about you?
For me, it was a very similar age. I think it was around about 49, 50 years old where I finally felt ready to put it behind me and to move on with my life. I always had one eye still on that mountain and still on the pursuit of maybe potentially going back to Everest. And it wasn't until, as I say, I got to my late 40s where I did a reality check, and I actually did a self-analysis of myself and realised, do I need this mountain in my life anymore now? And I came to the swift conclusion that no, I didn't. So it was probably around about 49, 50 where I became so much more content than I'd been for the previous 9 years of my life. And that lack of goal to go back to Everest, call it a lack of ambition if you like, was the defining thing for me. That's what allowed me to move on, and that's what allowed me to become more content and much happier where I was in life. So I would say my 40s were kind of ruined in many respects because of this self-driven goal to go and climb this mountain, which it's silly when you think about it, that just this personal goal to go out and achieve this had such a big bearing on my life. And I was adamant that I was not going to let my 50s go the exact same way as my 40s.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I mean, sometimes goals can actually get in the way. They can actually be bad things. I made a video a while back where I actually mentioned that I actually ditched life goals and stopped having goals when I witnessed a guy dying when I was on holiday. I'll leave a link in the description below if anybody wants to look at that video. That was certainly a life-changing event for me. So I echo that. I think what Ellis says there is very much the case. I think if you have a rethink about goals, you maybe approach life with less ambition, and I've covered that in a previous video as well.
So since I've become, let's say, less ambitious in life, I have been more content and I have been happier. I'm not saying I'm lazy. I'm not saying I'll spend all my days on the couch and don't do anything, because I do. I've moved into different areas of my life now that I enjoy. I have time to go to the gym. I have time to work freelancing in a coffee shop for an hour each morning. I no longer feel that energy, that charge to constantly achieve. And since I've been in this state of mind, life has been so much more colourful. So I totally get where you're coming from there, Nick. Less ambitious sometimes can be a good thing in life.
Since you turned 50, work. How does work fit into life?
It's still a part of my life, obviously, because I'm 50, so I'm not ready to fully step away from the machine, so to speak. But I am now. I've taken one foot off the pedal, and that I'm not as career orientated as I once was. I enjoy more things in life now, such as spending time with my family, being around for my family more so than I ever have done. So I do still work. I'm kind of working as a freelance marketer at the moment. That I work with an American company on their marketing, on their videos, and it gives me a lot of freedom to be able to do that. I'm able to go and sit in coffee shops and work for 5-6 hours invoice them out for the work that I've done, and it works very, very well for me. This, where I'm no longer tied, I'm no longer set to a restricted amount of hours. If I want to work at midnight till 3 in the morning, I can. If I want to work at 5 in the morning, that's entirely up to me, as long as I do the project that I'm being paid to do. And I absolutely love it. It's a much better way for me to now manage my time. That's also allowed me to have some passion projects and just to do some little side hustles. So another thing I'm now doing on an afternoon, because I have a block of a couple of hours from 11 till about 1 where I'm free. So I've now decided to go out and work delivering prescriptions for a pharmacy, just because I can, because I'm self-employed with what I do as a consultant, and that's allowed me to go out and do something else such as this, where I feel like I'm giving back, not resting on my laurels and not doing anything. I quite like it. It's a nice community job where I get to just drive and meet people and converse with them and talk, because I like chatting to people and I like getting to know people. And this little job that I'm doing, as well as the main stuff I'm doing, is great for my lifestyle. It lends itself really well to allowing me to live out the life the way I want to live it on my terms now.
So how many hours a week would you say that you work, you know, typically now that you're what, 52, aren't you?
Yeah, no more than 20, I would say, and that's on a tough week. Anywhere between 15 to 20 hours a week is where I am now, which is great for me, because that then gives me the freedom that at 50-year-old I've been seeking, and I want to go out. I'm not fully prepared to step back. I still do need to do a little bit, but for my own mental clarity more than anything else. And I'm happy. I'm happy where I am right now. The book that I wrote about my Everest climbs has done well. I've been able to live off some of the royalties from that. So I'm in a good place, and that's allowed me to have this emotional clarity since turning 50-year-old, knowing where I want to be in life now, and knowing that I couldn't stay working in a corporate environment at this age of my life. I was ready to move into other areas. I have other hobbies, other interests, YouTube being one of them.
Ellis's YouTube channel is well worth a look. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check it out. Now, I'm interested on this work thing. I agree with you about work. I mean, I'm 64 now, retired at 44. And my definition of retirement doesn't mean no work. I did for 4 years, I have to admit. After 44, I spent the first 4 years not doing any work. But certainly in my 50s, I've always done a little bit of work. I've always worked at least 1 or 2 days a week. And the reason I do it is just to keep my brain sharp. It's the mental stimulation, so I'm in agreement with you on that. Now, what about the non-work hours, Ellis? What do you do with the 15 or 20 hours that you might have once spent at work, and you're now doing something else with them? What do you do?
Other than trying to grow a YouTube channel, I have time to go to a gym. I enjoy spending an hour and a half in the gym. I ferry my daughters from here to the post because they're 16, 17, so I'm around to be their full-time Uber driver at the moment. And I have that time now to do the things that are more important for me. If I want to go, a bit like what you said previously, Nick, if I want to go and watch a movie, I've got the time to do that. But at the moment, it's mainly all about a healthy lifestyle. I like getting out in nature, walking. I have a Labradoodle. I take the dog out for a walk. As I said, just try and keep on top of being healthy, being fitness conscious, and enjoying life, and spending a lot of time, with my wife going away to see places, going into cities such as York. This is all stuff that I wasn't able to do in my 40s. So I'm now reaping the benefits of taking my foot off the gas and having this extra time to do things that make my life worth living again. And life looks more colourful because I've got this time to be able to do these things.
That's the main point, that you're not at work anymore. You've got more time to enjoy yourself, indulge your hobbies, pastimes, health, all those kind of things, rather than staying at the, what they call it, the grindstone, in the rat race, the hamster wheel, all those kind of things. Yeah, so anyway, I think that's a wrap. Ellis, thanks very much for sharing this part of your life with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Nick. Thanks for having me on your channel. I'm really looking forward to the future now and going forward with this.
Well, that was a good day out with my friend Ellis at Seaton Carew. We finished the day with some fish and chips and a pint of Guinness. It was great to hear his stories of Mount Everest. Twice he went to the mountain. The first time he didn't manage to even get on the mountain to climb it. He was at base camp. The second time he did actually get up the mountain. He was on one of the famous ice sheets when there was an earthquake which caused an avalanche and wiped out the base camp that he'd been staying in only a day or so earlier, that close to death. I know from talking to Ellis today, that experience did change the course of his life. He made some changes in his 40s so that by the time he was 50, he could live life on his term, stress-free, more relaxed, and working a lot less hours. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, you might want to watch this one next. It's the last words that my father said to me to change the course of my life at 44. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.